Hello, everybody. Today we're going to be doing things a little bit differently. Instead of me standing in front of the class and you guys taking notes based off what I say, we are going to be looking at a PowerPoint presentation on your computers individually with me talking in the background. So if you guys have any questions or need to stop, you can just pause the recording and go back and look over it again. Please make sure that you guys are following along with your guided notes, which are on a separate Google Doc in the Google Classroom website. If you have any questions at all, do not hesitate to pause the video and raise your hand and ask for my help, and I will gladly come help you. So let's get started. Today we are going to be talking about the election of 1932. This is a presidential election, meaning election for the President of the United States, and it was between Herbert Hoover, who was the guy who was already in office. He was a Republican, and between Franklin Delano Roosevelt, otherwise known as FDR, who was a Democrat. I think you guys can all guess who wins this election. Here is Herbert Hoover, and here is FDR. So, as you guys know, the election of 1932 takes place really in the middle of the Great Depression. Things are terrible in the country. You have the Dust Bowl going on in the Midwest, which is affecting all the farmers' crops. And in most major cities, unemployment was at 25%, and in some cases as high as 33%. Here's a picture of some of the shanty towns that homeless people lived in during the Great Depression. These are called Hoovervilles, named after the current president of the time. So the worst year in the Depression was 1932, the same year as the presidential election. Herbert Hoover was already the president. That means he was the incumbent. He was a guy who was already in office, and he was reelected to run as president again. And for the Democratic Party, ran Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was the governor from New York. This is a little political cartoon from the time. It just shows this plane represents FDR. It's called A Message of Hope because FDR promises to get America out of the Great Depression. As you can imagine, the only real issue in the election was the Depression and how either candidate is going to get America out of the Depression. The American public had to decide which president they thought would do a better job of getting us out of the Depression, Herbert Hoover or Roosevelt. But as you can imagine, most Americans blamed Hoover for the Depression, so it was unlikely that they were going to vote for him again. Think about it. If someone who was a president now caused some kind of horrible event that really ruins your life, would you want to vote for him again and have him be your president for another 4 years? Probably not. So, much like Obama ran on a platform of change in 2008 and 2012, meaning he was going to change things for everybody, he was going to make things better, he was going to get us out of the Great Recession, which a lot of people blamed on George Bush. FDR ran on a platform of change too. He was going to come into the White House and change everything. He was going to make the country great. Again, he thought it was unlike Hoover, FDR thought it was the responsibility of the government to help out citizens when they needed help. So like giving them welfare, helping them find jobs again, helping them get back on their feet, which is a lot different from what Herbert Hoover believed. Here's a campaign button from FDR. FDR believed in something called the New Deal, which we're going to talk about more tomorrow. The New Deal was FDR's plan to get America out of the Great Depression. Under the New Deal, he offered things like aid for the unemployment, helping them get jobs, helping the country get back on its feet. Opposite from FDR was Herbert Hoover. So FDR believed that it was the government's responsibility to help people no matter what. Hoover thought the exact opposite. He thought it was the people's responsibility to help themselves. So with all these poor and starving people during the Depression, Hoover didn't want to help them. He thought it was up to them to help themselves. So how do you think the American public felt about Hoover? They thought that not only was the Depression his fault, but that he didn't do enough to try to help get America back on its feet and help people out. He didn't want people to become dependent on the government, and he didn't think it was up to the government to help. So, as you can imagine, FDR is our new president. FDR won the 1932 election because he came in on a platform of change, that he was going to make things better for everybody, whereas Herbert Hoover didn't want to do anything to help. When FDR is elected, it really starts the beginning of the end of the Great Depression. So a lot of Americans who might not have had any hope before, if you remember, we read a lot of songs and watched a lot of videos that showed how people really had no hope during the Great Depression. Now FDR is elected and people have hope again. Here's an election map. As you can probably guess, all the states that are in blue are states won by Democrats. The Democrat FDR, so he almost swept Herbert Hoover, who only won a couple states. So, on your guide and notes, I want you to answer these 3 questions. What was the most important campaign issue of the 1932 presidential election? How were Herbert Hoover's views regarding the role of government different from FDR? Think about it like this. One of them wanted to help people, one of them didn't. Which one was which? And lastly, what was FDR's New Deal? We briefly learned about it. We'll learn more about it tomorrow, but what was the New Deal? Remember, if you have any questions at all, please let me know. This is my first time doing this. I'm sure I spoke a little too fast and messed up a lot, but I hope you enjoyed this, and let me know what you think, and don't forget to fill out the guide and notes.